You walk into a bike shop and see a carbon fiber road bike hanging on the wall for $8,000. It looks like it should cost $200 to make. You are not wrong, and you are not right either. The real story of how that number gets built is stranger than you think. A bicycle looks like the simplest machine on earth. 2 wheels, a frame, a chain, but the company selling it is fighting a war on 5 fronts at once: raw materials, labor, retail, warranty, and fashion. Miss any one of them and a 100-year-old brand can vanish in 18 months. By the end of this video, you will understand why some bike companies print money while others go bankrupt selling the exact same product. Every bicycle company's economics begin with one decision: who makes the frame. Steel is cheap and forgiving. Aluminum is the mass market default, and carbon fiber is where the real margin lives. A carbon frame that costs a company around $150 to produce in a Taiwanese or Chinese factory can retail, once painted, branded, and shipped, for well over $2,000. That gap is not greed. It is the cost of everything invisible: mold design, quality testing, warranty risk, and years of engineering behind a single tube shape. Historically, this is why brands that design in-house but manufacture overseas, like Trek, Specialized, and Giant, dominate margin structure in this industry. Giant is unusual because it also manufactures for other bike brands, meaning it profits twice, once from its own bikes, and again from being the hidden factory behind logos it does not own. Here's the part most people never think about. The frame is maybe 20% of the sticker price. The other 80% is a fight you cannot see from the showroom floor. Almost every derailleur, brake, and shifter on a mid to high-end bike comes from one of 2 companies, Shimano or SRAM. This is not a minor supplier relationship. It is closer to a duopoly that quietly controls a huge share of a bike company's cost sheet and in turn, its profit margin. When component prices rise, as they did during global supply shortages a few years ago, bike brands cannot simply switch suppliers overnight. Bicycles are engineered around specific component systems years in advance. This is the trap that has broken smaller manufacturers. A company can nail the frame, the marketing, the brand story, and still lose money because a shifter that costs $40 now costs $70, and that cost cannot be passed to a customer who already paid full price for last year's model. For decades, bicycle economics ran through independent bike shops. A shop might mark up a bike 30 to 40%, but in exchange it handled assembly, fitting, warranty claims, and repairs, work the manufacturer did not have to touch. Then, direct-to-consumer brands like Canyon and, in electric bikes, Rad Power, rewired the entire model. Selling straight to the customer online can strip out that entire retail markup. The trade-off is real. A direct-to-consumer company saves on margin, but now has to build its own customer service, handle its own warranty logistics, and ship large, awkward, expensive-to-return boxes across an entire country. Several direct-to-consumer bike brands have learned this the hard way, growing fast on lower prices and then drowning in return shipping costs and service backlogs they were never built to handle. So who wins this industry? Is it the low-cost disruptor, the century-old legacy brand, the hidden factory that builds for everyone else? The answer might surprise you, because the most profitable bike companies are not always the ones selling the most bikes. Electric bikes have quietly become the most important variable in this entire industry's future. An e-bike can retail for 2 to 3 times a comparable analog bike, largely because of the battery and motor system, components that carry their own supply chain, their own margin structure, and their own safety and certification costs. For legacy brands, e-bikes have been a lifeline, expanding average order value, in a market where a normal bicycle can last a customer a decade or more with almost no repurchase need. This is one of the least talked about truths in the entire industry. A regular bicycle can be nearly unkillable. Once you sell someone a great bike, you may not sell them another one for 10 years. E-bikes, with their batteries degrading and their software needing updates, quietly created a repurchase cycle that traditional bicycles never had. Bicycle demand is brutally seasonal in most markets, spiking in spring and summer and falling off in winter. This forces companies to make a gamble months in advance, order too many bikes for a season that underperforms, and capital sits frozen in warehouses. Order too few, and a hot season leaves shelves empty, while a competitor's bikes fly off the floor. During the pandemic, this played out in slow motion in front of the entire industry. Demand spiked to historic highs. Companies scrambled to order more inventory and components, and by the time factories caught up and shipments arrived, demand had already cooled. Warehouses across the industry ended up overloaded with inventory nobody was buying anymore, forcing steep discounting that hurt margins for more than a year afterward. Owning a bicycle company looks like romance. Steel, speed, freedom, 100 years of Tour de France history. Underneath it is a business built on frame margins, a two-company component duopoly, a slow-motion war between retail and direct sales, and a seasonal inventory gamble that can wipe out a good year in a single miscalculated order. The bike has not changed much in a century. The economics behind it have never stopped moving. The next time you see that price tag on the wall, you are not just looking at a bicycle. You are looking at a factory in Taiwan, a duopoly in Japan and the United States, a warehouse full of risk, and a bet on what people will want to ride next summer.